Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Besson, IntuiLab's Chief Platform Evangelist. I love this product. I evangelize for this product. And in this next hour, I will try to have some of that passion rub off on you guys. IntuiFace is an amazing product that I think people tend to underestimate. They don't even know what it does as possible, so they assume it must be PowerPoint with multi-touch or something like that. When really it's interactive application creation. We just wouldn't say that formally because it makes it sound like a developer tool, and it's not. You never have to write code with the product, and you can achieve just amazing experiences. Hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll believe it, and you'll have a lot of confidence to start creating your own work. Just a little bit of a preamble. Let's start with talking about what it is you can create with IntuiFace. The answer is anything. Maybe that's a little too broad, but certainly any design, any layout, any storyboard, your content. If you look at the screen right now, these are all sample experiences that we've created with our product. And you notice they're all completely different. Some are portrait-oriented, some are landscape-oriented, some have dark themes, some have bright themes. They're all completely different. You control every single pixel of the design. There is no template you buy, pre-built applications that you buy. You can build anything you want. We've built these samples so you can download them. You can see what's possible. You can steal from it. You can be inspired by it. But you control every aspect of your design. It's hopefully much more freeing than maybe you anticipated. There are three primary components of the IntuiFace family, two of which are formally licensed. You need to buy them. One is not formally licensed. You don't have to buy it. Composer is the editor. That's the tool you use to create your interactive experiences. Player is the runtime. It's the tool you use to run the experiences you create with Composer. It is very possible that you will have a small number of composers and a large number of players because you have a small team building stuff but a large number of devices in the field running that stuff. Composer and player are licensed separately. You need to buy licenses if you want to get rid of a watermark, this sort of thing. There is a free edition of Composer, which is, I suspect many of you know. Composer runs on Windows. Got to use Windows. If you have a Mac, that's fine, but you need to run Windows on the Mac. So you might use Boot Camp, maybe Parallels. So you can. In fact, half our development team is on a Mac. They use Parallels. For Player, on the other hand, it supports multiple platforms. You can run Player on Windows. You can also run it on the iPad. You can run it on Android tablets. And you can run it on the Samsung Smart Signage platform. So that's 4 platforms total for Player. And we'll continue to add to that. So between us, doesn't leave this webinar, we should see Chrome OS support very soon. It's almost a web-based player. So that's Composer and Player. And this webinar will spend all our time in Composer because that's where the magic happens. Player just runs things. There's nothing to see. Management Console is the third big piece of the IntuiFace family. Management Console is used to publish your experiences for the purposes of sharing them and deploying them. Sharing with colleagues, sharing with clients. Deploying means taking it and putting it on those players that are out in the field. There is no license for Management Console. Everybody has access to Management Console. What will vary is the feature set available to you depending on the kind of license you have for Composer. So your Composer license determines the breadth of capability of Management Console. Okay? So Composer, Player, Management Console. There is a fourth piece called IntuiPad. It's a remote control. I'll touch on that at the end of the webinar. If you go to our pricing page, you'll notice, in fact, that there are 3 editions of Composer. There are no editions of Player. The only thing you're doing with Player is picking the platform and the duration. Is it a month rental? Is it an annual subscription? Is it perpetual? For Composer, there are actually editions, Free, Pro, and Enterprise. Free is free, Pro and Enterprise are not. You could use the pricing page to get a sense for what the feature differences are, but the most important point for today's webinar is everything I show you can be done in the free edition. I'm not cheating and stacking the webinar content with paid features. On very rare occasions, I will mention a paid feature as an aside, but everything you see today you can do right now on your own PC using Composer's free edition. That's it. That's the whole preamble. The rest of this webinar will be in Composer itself. Are there any crazy questions we need to address right now? It doesn't look like it, Seb, right?
No, it's fine for the moment. You can go.
Thank you. So some of you might be wondering, what the heck is this? This doesn't look like the IntuiFace that I downloaded. Well, we got too excited. We're releasing version 5. It's scheduled for tomorrow. So it's very close. So we thought, you know what, let's do a little version 5 preview for the webinar. And that's what you're seeing here. So Composer's look will be different. The fundamentals are identical. So everything we discussed in terms of creating an experience is completely unchanged. What's changed is the look of Composer itself, the user interface. This is technically still a pre-release, so if there are problems, we're allowed to have those problems. It's a pre-release. So bear with me if that happens. But so this is the new look for Composer. One of the big changes for us was to make the panels more dockable, make them more easily organized, put them on separate displays. It gives you more design space. You can maximize the space to work on your experience and then still pull up the panels when necessary. So let's get a little lay of the land. What you see here in the middle is what we call the scene. This is where you do your actual work. You would drag and drop content in here. You would organize it as you wished, your images, videos, documents, etc. It's a what you see, what you get editor, and this is where all that stuff happens. You drag and drop it here. Within the scene is a notion of layers. So if I open up the scene structure panel, this is the content of the existing scene. And you'll notice it's quite simple. There's an image, there's a text asset, and that's it. There's nothing else here right now. The scene structure reflects all of the stuff in the scene that I'm currently editing. You'll note front, middle, back. There are 3 layers, 3 major layers in each scene. This is important because for interactive experiences, that Z-axis matters. You can see the X-axis, that's left and right. You can see the Y-axis, that's up and down. The Z-axis is in and out of the screen. And when things are interactive, the notion of depth becomes important to your design. So we have these 3 explicit layers, front, middle, and back. And then within each layer, there's also implied layers as well. So technically, there's an infinite number of layers, but there are 3 major ones. So there's a one-to-one correspondence between everything in the scene and everything you see in the scene structure. Okay? Of course, you might have things in the scene that are invisible. Well, you're not going to see them in the scene, but you'll still find them listed in the structure. You could have multiple scenes in your experience. So this drop-down list at the top shows all of the scenes in my experience right now, and I can have many. I can have an unlimited number. You can think of these as slides. We call them spaces, forgive me, scenes, for a couple of reasons. One is the order isn't as relevant for the end user. Of course, organizing your work by scenes could be very helpful to you, the designer, but the end user's experience may be very independent of the order of the scenes, right? Under the covers, they might start in scene 1, then go to scene 50, then go to scene 4, depending on their selections. But for you as the designer, this order might matter. And so here's all of the scenes, and you can organize them through drag and drop if you want, and add an additional organizational construct called a sequence, which just allows me to group multiple scenes, as you see here, like philosophy and concepts. Okay, scenes, layers, sequences. Check, you're an expert of that. So let's go to the next section, which is assets and collections. Assets are the basic building blocks. These are the images and the videos and the documents of which your experience is comprised. There are multiple ways to add content to my experience. So one way is to add a container. So if I open up the assets panel, here are all the asset types I can add to my experience design. For example, an image. This is an image container. There's no image yet. It's just a container that can contain an image. In fact, if I double click on this, it's one way to pick an image. I can browse for it in the content library, which I'll show you in a moment, or I can browse to it on my Windows PC. Another way is just to go directly for Windows Explorer. So here's Windows Explorer. I have Beetlejuice, drag it right into my space, into the scene, and there you go. Here's my image. As I mentioned, what you see, what you get. So I can manipulate this as you would imagine, and then push play. This puts me into play mode because Composer embeds Player for Windows to test your own work. I'm running Player for Windows, and this image is infinitely interactive. We'll get to properties. The properties of everything in IntuiFace enables me to configure how things work and react, and one thing could be constraining what I can do to this image. Maybe I don't want people to rotate it. Maybe I don't want people to resize it. Okay, you can use the properties to do that. But by default, it's infinitely interactive. So there you have a single image. Let's add a couple other items. Let's give ourselves a little bit of room and add a PDF. And let's add a video. There we go. Did I have the video? Maybe not. Oh, it's coming. There it is. Okay, so now we have three asset types. We have a book, we have a video, we have an image. You know what? Let's make it a little more exciting and grab a few more images and throw them on top as well. By the way, you're already an image wall expert. You can make your own image wall in about 3 seconds. Now you know how. How's that for fast? So here we have a bunch of images, a video, and a PDF-based document, and we're jumping into play mode. This is, I have a multi-touch display, so I'm able to grab multiple images, or I can grab the video and the book and multiple images. I can move them and resize them and do the whole deal. Here's the book, which I can resize, by the way, but also I can turn the pages with my finger. Here's the video, so I can play the video, so now that's running, and while it's running I can resize it and turn the pages of the book and play with the images. You get the idea. Of course, I wouldn't normally create an experience so complicated as that, but you know what? If I'm deploying this to an 82-inch Surface Hub, which we will support, maybe you have the screen real estate to enable multiple people to do different things at the same time. If you're deploying to an iPad, you don't have that much experience. It's probably a single person experience. You wouldn't be designing to have so many things going on at the same time, but you could. If we go back to the assets panel, you've seen images, you've seen a document, you've seen videos. What else do we support? Webcam. You can get a live feed off a webcam. You can even take snapshots. Web browser. You can browse the web with an embedded web browser. You can blacklist or whitelist websites. You can constrain where people can visit. Flash animation. You can embed Flash. 3D models. We support multiple 3D model formats. Add them to your experience. They can become interactive as well. Audio. That could be background music, maybe sound effects. Microsoft Deep Zoom. Some of you might be familiar with this technology. It's a really cool technology enabling you to zoom in closer and closer and closer and closer. We also support a couple text assets, a few controls, which we'll talk about in a bit, and a couple of shapes that you can use to sort of decorate your experience, maybe create a data sheet and give it a little background color, that sort of thing. All of these things can be added to your experience and organized any way you deem fit. A couple final points here. There's a lot of flexibility in IntuiFace. Obviously, we can't address all of it now. Here's just a couple other examples. If I go back to Windows Explorer, I have an image here. It's actually a full HD image. It's 1920 by 1080. It's the same size as the project that I'm currently working in, 1920 by 1080. I have the option of changing the background image. Now, if you look, see this funky triangle thing going on here? If I click it with my mouse, you'll notice that it's the space itself in the structure. It's not an image in a layer. It's all by its lonesome. It's an individual property. If I right-click this image, I can set it as the background. Notice that background could be an image, could be a video, or it could be a color. What's important for you to understand is you literally control every pixel, and this is one way you can brand the experience your own, is to control that background image or video. So it's your brand marks, it's your brand colors, so it's entirely yours. And how easy is that, right? It's a couple of mouse clicks. Another point, Photoshop. If any of you are graphic designers who work in Photoshop, just as I've been dragging and dropping images, you can drag and drop PSD files. When you drag and drop a PSD file, Composer is smart enough to parse it and create an image for each individual labeled layer. So a single PSD might contain multiple images, and one drag and drop will import all of those images automatically. It's even smart enough to do a diff, so if you keep drag and dropping the same PSD over time, it's smart enough to only grab the changes. Final point, you can see a little triangle here that's play and rewind for the video. Here's next and previous pages. These little tiny controls are also configurable. So some of you have used the product for a while, might say, well, but I want to use a different icon. Maybe there's something custom. In the project menu, if I go to project settings, there's something called experience style. There's a few pre-built styles, but you can also create your own. And it enables you to change the look and feel of all of these buttons. Literally every single pixel is yours. Well, that's it. You're an asset expert. So let's talk about collections. So here I have all of my images, right? These are individual images. You know that. If I select all of them and right-click, I can add them into a group. A group is similar to the group that you know from PowerPoint. The idea is you have multiple things in a single interactive context, and they maintain their spatial relationship. So as I resize or shrink the bounding box, it accommodates the content as well. See that? You might use this to create a data sheet in IntuiFace. You could create a data sheet in IntuiFace with images and videos and documents, but use the group to keep them all together, to make them spatially relevant to each other so you can resize it. Still a bit of an advanced concept. Let's pick an easier one. I'll open the Properties panel. So I'm looking at the Properties panel for this particular collection. I can use this drop-down list to change the collection type to better illustrate what a collection is in general. So let me pick the asset flow. Collections exist to enable you to display multiple items in a single interactive context. In this case, it's just multiple images. Using the properties here, let's increase the height a little bit. Let's increase basically the size of these items. Let's spread them out a little bit. Very good. Put them a little farther in the distance and spread them out a bit more. So that I'm using these properties to configure how that works. Play. So now we're going into play mode to just take a quick look at this asset flow. I'm using my finger, sliding to the left, sliding to the right. Is that pretty? And come on, that was easy. Easy. Collections can contain one asset type, like a bunch of images, as we're doing here. It can contain multiple asset types. You can have images, videos, documents, etc. in the same collection. It could contain collections. So you could have collections inside collections, which could get confusing or really cool depending on how creative you are. Okay. Again, there are multiple collection types. This is the asset flow. There's also the asset grid. That's rows and columns, multiple rows, multiple columns. There's the carousel, which honestly is pretty enough that let's take a look at it. Using the properties panel, let's change the view angle. Up a little bit, reduce the diameter. There we go. Let's go back into play mode just so we can play with the carousel. Using my finger, sliding to the left. I can do a tap and it swings around. Isn't that nice? There's the carousel. I can even put controls in collections. If you remember back in the asset panel, I mentioned we had controls like buttons. Well, you could put buttons inside the collection, treat it like a table of contents. So you can browse a bunch of content. Under the covers is a bunch of buttons. And if somebody touches it, it causes a bunch of things to happen. We'll talk about how to do that in a moment. What else? Circular panel. Circular, but it's an endless circle. So if you have more items than visually fit, that's okay. You can still use it. Flip chart, one at a time. Group, you've seen a group, maintains the spatial relationship. Helix, it's like a strand of DNA. It's also infinite. A map, that's too good, so we're going to look at that in a moment, so hang on. Pinboard, it's a space inside a space. So a group collection preserves spatial orientation. The pinboard ignores it. Things inside a pinboard are independently interactive, as if it was a space inside of a space. You can get real funky with pinboards. Slideshow. That's the slow pan, zoom, transition to an image. Slow pan and zoom, transition to a new image. It's called the Ken Burns effect. Some of you might notice the Ken Burns effect. It's not really meant to be interactive like the other collections. It's really just a visual thing. And then finally a timeline. A timeline is a lot like the map. So rather than talking about the timeline, let's just bring out the map. Let's close properties. Here's our list of collections. Let's add a map. Let's give ourselves some room here. We have two different kinds of maps out of the box. OpenStreetMaps, Bing Maps. These are live feeds. There's nothing on my PC right now. I have an internet connection. That's where this is coming from. OpenStreetMaps is free by definition. Bing Maps does require an API key from Microsoft. I don't believe it costs anything, but you do have to formally request it. If you don't have the API key, then in IntuiFace is a little message that says you need one. This is OpenStreetMaps. You don't need a key. I'm using my mouse to zoom in on this map. This is not on my PC. This is streaming over the internet as we speak. I'm working out of my home today. That's north of Boston on the North Shore, the tip of the North Shore, just above Gloucester, in a town called Rockport. So I'm waving to you right from there. Well, now that's cool, right? We have an interactive map, and you can browse it, you can zoom it. I mean, that's cool. Why is this called a collection? Good question. So let's see why this is a collection. If I grab an image, it could be any image, but I'm grabbing this little guy right here. Let's open up the Properties panel. See, here's an image inside the map. Okay? Notice that it has a latitude and longitude coordinate. This is a point of interest. If I move the map, the point of interest stays put. I can add images, videos, documents, any asset type, any collection type, any control inside the map collection and assign them to very specific points in that map. These could be my retail locations, it could be my college buddies, it could be whatever. And they could be interactive. So I could put a video on a particular location and make it playable. I could put a button on a particular location and enable it so when somebody touches it, they're navigated to a new space with additional information. Admit it, that's pretty cool. The timeline collection is like the map, but it's dates instead of latitude, longitude. I assign content to dates, and I can zoom in and zoom out on years and on months and on days, and I can slide it side to side. A really neat way to present content that are either dimensionally relevant on a map or to time. So that's the map collection and the timeline collection. Do you have any questions before I continue?
I think we have finally answered most of them in the chat room. Just a reminder, we have lots of training resources available on the website. I will put the link again for everyone in the chat room.
Merci, Seb. Next, let's talk about properties. Let's use the content library this time, shall we? So here we are in the content library. This is a list of all of the content used in my experience. Now you might remember that the scene structure is specific to one space. It's specific to the scene I'm currently editing. Oops, wrong one. The content library is global to my experience because I might use the same image, for example, on more than one space, in more than one scene. So I have all of my content in my experience. Here are the images I dragged in, right? Let me select all of these guys, drag them in, and it says insert individually or insert as a collection. Let's insert as a collection. And we default to the asset flow, which is good enough for me. And then let's also grab, this is the PDF, right? So let's grab the PDF. So here's the asset flow. Here's the PDF. Very good. Let's talk about properties a little bit. Here's the book. Now remember, when I was in play mode earlier, this was a horizontal scroll. We actually have three themes, three styles for the book. In the properties panel, I can change it with a quick mouse click. Instead of a horizontal scroll, it could be vertical, it could be a book. So let me select book and resize that a bit and get ready for the work. Here's properties of the asset grid collection. You've seen me manipulate some of these already. I'll show you a couple new ones. Tap item to open, drag and drop item to open. Let me show you what they mean. So let's go to play mode. First we have our book. Look at my finger. Well, you get what my finger's doing. I'm turning the page of the book, right? It's still multi-touch if I want it to be, but I can also turn the page. My asset flow, swipe to the left, swipe to the right. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, 1, 2, 3, touch. And it pops out a copy. Why? Because I click the text box, the little checkbox, tap item to open. Mr. Scissorhands, 1, 2, 3, drag and drop. Why? Because I click the checkbox, drag and drop to open. It's like you're a coding genius, but you're not writing code. Properties, there's a ton of properties that configures the way things look, the way they react, and even sometimes gives them additional capability. It's something to explore. There's lots of properties. Obviously, we're not going to cover them all here. It might be interesting to talk about two other uses of properties that are particularly interesting. The first would be visual effects. See this book? Keep an eye on the book. In the properties panel, I have on the effects category, I have opacity. Watch as I reduce opacity. Watch the book. Down, 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 down. See that? Up, 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 up. And blur, and grayscale, and sepia, and hue and brightness. So you don't need Photoshop to manipulate some aspects of the visuals. And thanks to animation, which is something we'll touch on later, you can animate really the change of any property representing values, like opacity. You can animate a change in opacity. So maybe you're getting a couple sparks now, couple design excitement because you're realizing there's a lot more you can do than just making an image wall. Let's talk about another tool. So let me open the space content panel, space structure, the scene structure panel. Notice here's the asset grid of my scene structure. There are 5 images inside it, right? Those are children of the collection. Here are the 5 images inside that collection. I'm highlighting all 5, which means please show me the properties that are shared by all of these images collectively. I can, in the properties panel, turn on the drawing tools. Click. Let's change gray to red. I don't know why we default to a gray color. There's red. Let me add another pen width. So there's a pen width. With a couple clicks of the mouse, you can turn on the drawing tool. This is how you can draw on the screen. We get asked this a lot. How do you annotate content? How can you draw on the screen? It's this easy. Play. So let's do 1, 2, 3 Beetlejuice. If you'll notice, there's a little button on the left. If I touch it, there's my drawing tool that I turned on by the click of the mouse. So this pen width, red color, Michael Keaton. Should have won an Oscar. Here's Gina Davis. You don't see much of her anymore. And this is, what's his name, Alec Baldwin, who's a pretty funny guy. Hates the press, but he's a funny guy. Notice, by the way, that these are retained. I don't lose the drawings if I shut off the drawing tool. I can take a snapshot of this, save it to a local file system, email it as an attachment. All of this is possible in IntuiFace. Ask somebody who writes code how long it would take them to write this. It's a lot easier here. So now you have a sense of what you can do with properties. Again, there's a million of them. Well, okay, there's not a million of them, but there's a lot. And over time, you'll discover what's possible. It's quite extensive. I could be wrong. I think you're now property experts. I don't know, Seb, if there's any questions.
No, I think you're doing a great job here, Jeff.
Okie doke. Next, triggers and actions. Triggers, when this happens. Actions, then do that. Buttons exist to be a trigger. It's their only purpose in life is to be a trigger. That's why we have a button. Now, in fact, everything has triggers and everything has actions. But let's start with the basic. Here's a button. It exists to be a trigger. Let's make it a little easier to see. So instead of filling it with white, let's make it a red button. Let's go to text. Should be a little white. There you go. And I can use press me. There we go. Okay. Here's a button. Here's a pretty button. The problem is it doesn't do anything yet, right? I added a button, but it's a naked button. It has no purpose in life. So let's give it a purpose. That's that lightning bolt in the upper right. Add a trigger. There's no triggers yet. It's a button, but there's not even a trigger yet, let alone an action. Let's open up the triggers and actions panel. When the press me button is pressed and released, then, well, we didn't specify yet. There's no then yet. We are, however, defaulting to when it's pressed and released. Notice you could choose as pressed. We default to as released because it lets the user change their mind. If they touch the button but drag their finger off, we know to ignore that because we're going on the is release movement, not the press movement. If we did as press, the second that finger touched the button, it would trigger the action. So when that button is pressed and released, then what? So let me click this clause, the then clause. Let's do navigation. That's pretty common, right? How do we go from one scene to another? Scene to scene navigation, go to the scene named properties. When that button is pressed, then navigate this experience to the scene named properties. Let's try it out. Okay, it says press me, 1, 2, 3, touch. And here we are in the property space. I'm using the button to capture a trigger event. I'm using that trigger event to cause an action, which in this case is navigation. Everything in IntuiFace has a trigger. Every asset type, every collection type, everything has triggers, all of them, including the space itself. Look what happens if I drag my finger in the bottom right-hand corner of the scene. I'm back to the triggers and action space. Let's take a look. If you look at, I'm on the scene itself. I'm clicking the scene itself, not the button, not the text. I'm on the scene itself. You can tell that from the scene structure panel. Notice I'm on the scene itself. It has two triggers of its own. The text and gesture swipe left, the text and gesture swipe right. So the scene itself recognizes on-screen gestures that I can then use to make a bunch of actions happen. In this case, it's navigation. In fact, it's next and previous where the order of the scenes actually makes a difference. It's the next scene in that scene panel order. Doesn't have to be. You saw I can do very explicit navigation. Here's one other example of an interesting trigger. We get asked this a lot. I have an experience in a public location. I don't want it to get stuck on some random scene that doesn't attract attention. I built an attract loop. I want my experience to reset itself in a public place so that people always see this attract loop. How do I do that? The answer is to create an inactivity timer. And you can do that at any level. We'll do it on the space itself. I'm adding a trigger. So on the space itself, on the scene, timers has been inactive for a given amount of time. But just for this example, we'll say 3 seconds. When the scene has been inactive for 3 seconds, then, okay, scene-to-scene navigation, why not? Properties. Of course, 3 seconds doesn't make any sense if you're in a public place. You need to come up with a duration that makes sense. If you have a 2-minute video, you don't want a 60-second inactivity timer. Nevertheless, let's see this in action. Play. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, go. It works. The product didn't make a fool out of me. So you see how that works. Every trigger can have one or more actions. If you look at this inactivity timer, the then clause has a go to scene properties, but then has this button to add another action. You can have multiple actions, an unlimited number of actions. In fact, thanks to animation, not only can you have multiple actions, but you can choreograph them. So we're not going to be an animation expert in this webinar, but I can animate actions. How long do they take? What kind of speed? What kind of profile? Should they repeat? And if I have multiple actions for the same trigger, I can choreograph them. In fact, that's what this little timeline here does. I can change when things happen, sequence them properly. Again, for the purposes of this webinar, we're not going to become experts, but every single action can be animated. Actually, I don't know if I should say that. 99% of all, I imagine there's a couple that can't, but the majority can. Final point, these actions can be remote. So right now, it's the actions have been in the same experience as the trigger. So the trigger is in this experience, the actions in this experience. That doesn't have to be the case. Your actions could be in different experiences. Experience A might have a trigger that causes actions to happen in experience B, C, D, E, and F. So you can not only choreograph actions within a particular experience, but you can choreograph them across experiences. It's too good. It's too good to be true. Now you know why I'm such a freak about my product. Seb, any new questions?
Actually, yes, we just got 2 questions. Can we get some examples of what animations are available? So let me... The first thing is you can animate any numeric property. So basically you can move, resize, rotate, change the opacity of any asset, any collection. So that's already quite a lot of things you can do. And for more information, you can check this article, which details how to work with animations. I just sent it in the chat room. And new question, is there a suggested technique for closing an experience with a hidden button or something like that? You have several ways of doing that. The first thing would be to call the exit application action, and then the trigger could be effectively a hidden button or a space gesture, what we call an expert gesture, not just a swipe down or up. Personally, I like to do in some demos that I put on trade shows. With a swipe down, I make a new panel appear in the home space of the experience with an exit button hidden in this space. So this is the kind of thing you can imagine. You can even put a text input and ask the user to enter a specific code. If the code is right, then you exit the application. So that's really something you can customize.
Yeah, we could do regular expression matching so that you can verify the text that's entered is appropriate. As Seb said, any property representing either implicitly or explicitly a numerical value can be animated, right? Visibility is an implied numerical value, right? It's an opacity of 100% through 0. Well, you can animate that. Other properties are explicit, like the x-coordinate and y-coordinate. Those are explicitly numbers. You can animate a change in that. Virtually anything can be animated because they either implicitly or explicitly represent a value that you can then animate through. And again, in the actions panel, it's this show timing and animation button right here. If I click it, it allows me to configure how you want to animate these given values. And the best way is just to experiment. Next, design accelerators. This is pre-built content we have created to accelerate your ability to create visually engaging experiences and to speed your ability to make them memorably interactive, right? You're new to the product. You want to do something quickly that looks very professional. We've pre-built all this stuff here in the Design Accelerators panel. A small percentage are pre-installed with the product. The others you can get by clicking this Get More Accelerators button. See that? They're all free. Doesn't cost you anything. You can download any of them, even with the free edition of Composer. You can download all of them. Use them in your experience. You'll notice background images and videos. There's a bunch of different button styles that you can incorporate. Menus have been pre-built, sound effects. We'll talk about Twitter and weather and accessing dynamic information in a bit, but we've created some beautiful templates for you. Here's one good example, though, which are touch gesture icons. Obviously, you want to make your experience as intuitive as possible. And any explaining you have to do ideally is done visually and not through text. Because if it takes people a long time to read instructions to get something done, you probably lost their interest. One thing we've created are these touch gesture icons. So let me add this particular one, and we'll go into play mode. So let's see what this does. Notice, through animation, we are increasing and decreasing the scale of this image. It's saying double tap. That's what it's saying. Double tap here. And feel free to use that as you wish. How is this working, by the way? We're animating the scale. So these design accelerators aren't just maybe an image. They could be a group, could be a collection, could be a space. They could be pre-configured with actions. They could be very rich. It's not just dragging an image or something like that. In this case, it comes pre-configured with a trigger. So you see there's a timer on this image itself, and there's a resize action that's actually animated. So repetitively resizes up and down that image. And you know how to do that. So that's where design accelerators come in. Now paid feature warning. If you want to create your own design accelerators, you can if you have a Composer Enterprise license. So with a Composer Enterprise license, you can create your own design accelerators and use them across projects. Feel free to explore. They're free to download, free to use. Any edition of Composer, be our guest. Final major topic, interface assets and binding. This could be a book all by itself. This is one of the most distinguishing aspects of IntuiFace, certainly. The ability to interface with any external device, business logic, data source. This is the mechanism enabling you to create a dynamic experience and not just a static one. A static experience looks the same at runtime as it did at design time. A dynamic one does not. Here's a simple example. We have customers creating retail point of sale applications with IntuiFace. It's an endless aisle application where they're making inventory visible and available in real time. Well, okay, it better have the right price. It better still be in stock if it's listed. The available colors better be accurate. You can't have a price that's out of date in the store, right? That needs to be dynamic. The beauty of interface assets is you can connect with third-party data sources to access that information on the fly. You can do the same thing with the entire Internet of Things. Basically, the rule is if it has an API, you can interface with it. If you don't know what an API is, don't worry about it. Needless to say, anything on the planet that is accessible over the Internet and has an API, you can work with in IntuiFace. Pretty cool. Here's an example. So this is the Interface Assets panel. I'm clicking the Add an Interface Asset button. These are all of the pre-built interface assets that ship out of the box. There's a bunch of them. Analytics. Maybe you want to identify the most popular item, the most frequently visited space. You want to collect these metrics across experiences, across geographic locations. You can use this analytics interface asset. Notice that's business logic. Here's device information, tablet orientation, system info. Excel, a key component to doing data-driven experiences, where the data is not in IntuiFace, it's in a spreadsheet. In fact, Seb Meunier, my colleague here on the call, hosts a Working with Data and Analytics webinar where he'll make you an Excel expert. Geocoding, Philips Hue out of the box. Turn the Philips Hue light bulb on and off, change the color, make it blink. Why? Because it's on the internet and has an API. And we built the interface asset out of the box. QR code generation, sending emails, sharing content to the file system or USB key. Live Flickr feed, Instagram search, RSS feed, Twitter feed. Chronometer, clock, countdown. This is logic, business logic, programming logic, number generation, global variable to store values for use elsewhere in your experience. Overwhelming, huh? I mean, there's a lot here. All documented online, by the way. Even our Connect support, I don't have Connect in this device, but Connect support is through an interface. Technically, you could have built your own support for Microsoft Connect. We document how to do it online. We just ship some of these things out of the box. Let's look at weather. So let me add weather. And here it is. So now I have the weather interface asset in my experience, and I'm dragging into the scene. This is what we call the data template. It's a visualization of the content available through this interface asset. You don't have to use this. If you look at the scene structure panel, it's just text assets and image assets. There's a collection here, this kind of thing. You can completely change this. You don't have to use this. It's just a way to visualize it. This is live. I don't have London's weather on my PC. If I open up the properties panel for the weather interface asset, one of its properties is location. Boston. So now we have the weather in Boston. You can see it's hot and lousy. It's humid today. This is live right now this second. Here's another example. Let's do Twitter. Let's drag that puppy in and make some room. So this is a live Twitter feed. If I go to the properties of my Twitter feed, the first property is the search query, and it can be anything we want. Let's do the username, the IBM username. So this has now updated itself to be IBM. Let me push play. This is a live feed. If I'm using my finger, I'm scrolling through this feed, and it can be refreshed. Want some eye candy? Touch that image, and it pops at the image. Pretty cool. We ship all these interface assets out of the box. We document online how to build your own. If it's on the internet and it has an API, you can work with it. If it's on your PC, you can work with it. It doesn't even have to be on the internet. As long as there's an API, you can work with it. Crazy flexible. Let's talk about binding. Why is binding on this page? What the heck is binding? Why do we care? Binding is a fundamental element of the interface asset concept. This weather information is coming from somebody called Open Weather. There's a service. It's free. They have an API. You can get the weather. How do we get that information from the service and map it to the text assets and the image assets you see in the experience? Through binding. You're binding this destination to the source. So for example, this word Boston, under the covers, that's a text asset that is bound to a property of the weather service. So whatever that property, that city property is of the weather service will show up here. Let me give you a simpler example. Do you see this logo right here? Let me click it and open up the properties panel. Notice that its X and Y coordinate is, I think that's fuchsia. My wife would be proud. I think that's a fuchsia color. That color means that it is bound to something else, that this X value and Y value is not determined here, it's determined someplace else. If I click either one, it shows me the source. Let me click this drop-down arrow. It's telling me, aha, it's in a different scene. It's not in this scene, it's in the scene called Introduction, and it's coming from this image called IntuiFace logo. That's where it's coming from. Let's prove it. Let's go to the introduction scene. Here's my logo. Let's get this out of the way. Here's my logo. Let's drag it down and then go back to our triggers and action space. Interface asset space. See my logo? Because it is bound to the logo in the first scene, it moves down too. Binding is crazy powerful to the point that you could do things. I've seen things, I don't know how they do it. I'll be honest. Because you don't have to bind the same property. I don't have to bind X to X. I can bind X to anything. We even have the notion of binding converters. It takes the source value and allows you to manipulate it before you hand it off to the target. We have lots of binding converters as well. What you'll discover is what we continue to do is introduce powerful development concepts in a way that non-developers can do it. Because even if you're not a developer, the better you get with IntuiFace, the more adventurous and ambitious your ideas get, and you're going to want to do A, B, and C. Our addition of these features that realize development concepts in a non-development way allow you to do that. Binding is one of the ways to do that. I don't expect you to be an expert now. This is an introductory webinar, but now you know it exists and you can start playing with it. Seb, any questions?
We have questions that I will answer directly in the chat room. One is about wayfinding. Can you do wayfinding with IntuiFace? So technically, we don't have a wayfinding capability built in, rightly accessible in IntuiFace, although you can create an interactive directory from an Excel file quite easily. And from this Excel file, depending on the data you have inside, you could position point of interest in the map collection, or above a picture of a floor plan if you have the coordinates in pixels of those images. It's not the fastest way to do it, but this is how it works nowadays within IntuiFace. And for the other one, I have to read it because it's quite longer. So go on.
Thank you. Yeah, wayfinding is a good example. There are dedicated applications. That's all they do. They do nothing else, and some do them better than others. Our product exists to enable you to build anything. So the downside of that, of course, is that we don't always have a dedicated plugin for X, Y, and Z, and wayfinding is an example. There's multiple ways to build a wayfinding experience using IntuiFace, but they might require to use multiple features you've been introduced to and combine them in a creative way. As Seb said, one way would be to stock up an Excel spreadsheet with the location of each item and dynamically map it. We didn't show you how to do that, but you can do it, and if you watch Seb's webinar, Working with Data Analytics, it'll give you a head start on how to get there. Well, you've seen all of the fundamental features of IntuiFace. You can run your own webinars now. Let's talk about what to do with your work. You've built your experience, you want to share it with a colleague, you want to share it with a client, maybe you want to deploy it to Player. First step is to publish it. Publishing means creating a copy in your cloud storage environment, not ours. We don't offer cloud space. It's yours. It's your Amazon S3 account, your Box, Dropbox account, your FTP site. Using Management Console, you tell us what to use, you give us permission to access it, and then in Composer, under the File menu, you select Publish. And that means, please take a copy of this and shove it up there in my cloud storage. If you published it before, then it's a differential publish. It'll be faster because it only publishes the changes. By publishing, you have put it in a location where you can now share it or deploy it. In Management Console, now that the experience has been published, you can access it, and if you touch it, a window pops up that, among other things, allows you to share it. You can see it here at the bottom. You enter the email address of all the people you want to share it with. If they have an IntuiFace account, they get an email. That email says, hey, Jeff just shared something cool with you. You'll find it in, go download it. You'll find it in Composer Player. If the email address is not associated with an existing IntuiFace account, they still get an email, but the email says, hey, Jeff shared something cool with you. You need to get your own account. And it gives them instructions. Where does it show up? In the Experiences panel. So let me open up the Experiences panel. This is what you see when you run Composer or Player. The New tab lets me make a new experience, so I can do a blank slate, that completely nothing in it, or some simple templates you can use to kickstart a new experience. Then there's My Experiences. So these are the things that are built on this particular PC, or that I built in my account on other PCs. They're still mine, so they show up on the My Experiences tab. Shared with me are experiences built by somebody else, and they shared it with me using the method we just discussed in Management Console. And all I have to do is just click download, and it downloads to my PC. Or any device. This is exactly how it works in Player as well. The marketplace lists all of the sample experiences we've pre-created for you. Again, freely downloadable. They give you a nice idea of the variety of capabilities, the variety of experiences possible. Free to download, free to manipulate, free to steal from, do whatever you want with them. But certainly take advantage of them. By publishing, I can share. By publishing, I can deploy. Again, here we are in Management Console. Here's all of the experiences I've published. Here are all of the players in the field associated with my account. I just need to drag an experience from the top to the bottom, and that means go deploy it. It's hands-free, automated deployment. Now, feature alert, paid feature alert, you need at least one Composer Enterprise license to do that. If you want to do automated deployment from the pleasure of your own office without ever having to leave, you need at least one Composer Enterprise license. If you have Composer Free or Composer Pro, it's manual. You open up Player, you go to the Shared With Me tab or My Experiences tab, you download it yourself, you play it yourself. With Composer Enterprise, you can drag and drop. It could be 1,000 displays. Here we have tags and filters. You can filter and by tag, and then do a single drag and drop for all devices. It could be 1,000 devices, one drag and drop. Classic signage capability, right? Multiple signs, single experience, same idea. In fact, more and more of our customers are using IntuiFace to create interactive content for signage. You know, what's the difference between a kiosk and an interactive sign, right? The lines are blurring. So more and more customers are using this for what might have once been considered signage, but they want it to be interactive, and they're using our product. And we could do scheduling, we could do usage analytics, you could do deployment. It's all the same stuff. But this is multi-touch. Other topics. We talked about analytics a little bit. You can collect automatically what people have touched, what spaces they visit, what videos they watched. All of this information can be collected across all of your displays, across all geographies, have it collated, download it to Excel, maybe into a third-party data mining tool. It's the #1 advantage, maybe, of interactive content. You know exactly what people are interested in because they touched it. They expressed their interest. For traditional passive signage, you don't know what works. So usage is huge. Player. Again, when I was pushing Play and Composer, what I'm using is an embedded version of Player for Windows. I can also buy Player for Windows separately. There is also Player for iPad, Player for Android, and Player for the Samsung Smart Signage platform. They all work. Content import. We talked about Photoshop files. You can do the same with Microsoft Office, Excel, PowerPoint, Word. The remote control. This is the 4th member of the IntuiFace family. If you look for the IntuiPad in Google Play, the Apple App Store, the Windows Store, IntuiPad, it's a free remote control enabling you to remotely drive an experience running on a Windows PC. I might be in front of an audience and we're using a projector to show my experience on a big wall. I'm not interacting with that thing. It's projected on a wall. I need a ladder. It's not even a touch screen. That's all right. Grab an iPad, run into a pad. I can walk around the audience and using my finger drive the experience on the iPad. Everybody sees the results on the big screen. Scheduling. Another classic signage type capability that you can do in IntuiFace. You can specify times of days for certain things to happen. Days, weeks, years, whatever you want. And then remote actions. We talked about that as well, right? The ability to trigger actions in remote experiences. Or in remote devices, the interface asset concept also applies to triggers and actions. The trigger might be in my experience, but the action is in, I don't know, my refrigerator. The Philips Hue light bulb, which you support out of the box, if I turn it on and off, that's an action. We put a lot of self-education content on the web. If you go to the Learn menu on our website, the first child option is Teach Yourself. Click that. A lot of self-education options available, step-by-step tutorial, which is really great. Well, you did the best thing, which is watch this webinar. This is the best thing. Nice exposure. You get to see me use the product. Next, I would say the step-by-step tutorial because it forces you to get your hands dirty. There are instructional videos. There's more than 200 articles in our online library. We love that thing. We're very proud of it. There are a bunch of discussion forums that you can participate in, ask questions, get answers, and then all of the pre-built samples that you saw that you can download for free and manipulate. We put intuitive in the name of our product, so it better be. But we've created all this content to help you build your skill set as quickly as possible. I really think you could measure it in a day or two. I really believe you can create something really, I don't know if I can say kick-ass in a webinar, but I'll bet you in a day you can build something that would far exceed your expectations, your boss's expectations. Bet me. Seb, any questions?
I think we're good with the questions.
Okay. Well, that was a packed hour. Hopefully, I've imparted a little bit of my excitement about this product. Certainly, I hope you're a little more inspired about what you could create. I bet it's a lot more than you thought. And it will take a little bit of time, but I think it'll be time well spent. It's pretty unlimited what you can create. Seb and I will stick around a little longer for questions, but for the purposes of the recording, thanks to everybody. Really appreciate you taking part.